Hello students, welcome to iTTV. Today we are going to learn the classification of microorganisms. Do you know that microorganisms surrounding us every day? But these microorganisms can't be viewed with our naked eye. They can only be seen using a microscope. In today's lesson, we are going to learn how to classify these microorganisms like bacteria, fungi, protozoa, algae, and viruses. On top of that, we are going to list and describe these different types of classification of microorganisms. Here are some of the examples of harmful microorganisms. They are flu viruses and dangerous protozoa. Here you can see the useful microorganisms, and the example is yeast in making bread. Now, we have learned the useful and harmful microorganisms. Let's learn how to classify these microorganisms. Most microorganisms are unicellular. They are usually too small to be seen with naked eye. However, they can be seen with the help of microscope. Here you can see microorganisms can be classified into bacteria, fungi, protozoa, algae, and viruses. So we have learned the different types and classes of microorganisms. Now let's learn about the characteristic about these microorganisms. How are we to see in terms of habitat, appearances, nutrition, and method of reproduction? Microorganisms are grouped based on the following criteria. 1. Appearances. 2. Habitat. 3. Method of reproduction. And 4. Nutrition. So let's start today's lesson by learning bacteria. Characteristics of bacteria. Bacteria are unicellular microorganisms. Some bacteria move about their environment by using long structure called flagella. There are thousands of species of bacteria. They can be classified into 4 main shapes. Bacteria that are rod-shaped are called bacilli, spherical-shaped are called cocci, spiral in shape are called spirilla, and comma-shaped are called vibrios. So here we have seen how bacteria's appearances and different types of shapes. Now let's learn the next one, that is on habitat of the bacteria. Bacteria are among the earliest form of life that appear on Earth billions of years ago. Bacteria can be found in just about every material and environment on Earth, such as soil, plants, animals, and human beings. They can even be found in extreme conditions such as high temperature and cold temperature. So here we can see that bacteria can actually live in 2 different extreme conditions. One is a very high temperature and 2 cold temperature, whereby what we can see in here, it can even live in a boiling water and also in polar ice. How does bacteria get nutrient to grow and survive in different conditions? Bacteria which photosynthesizes are called autotrophs. These bacteria make their own food through photosynthesis. The chlorophyll absorbs sunlight to produce nutrients for the bacteria to grow and survive. So from here we can understand that bacteria that make their own food are called autotrophs. Why? Because they have chlorophyll and they can actually do photosynthesis process by absorbing the sunlight. But how about bacteria that actually absorb? They don't have this chlorophyll. What are they called? Some bacteria absorb nutrients from dead organic matters and living organisms. Some example absorption through dead organic matters are the bacteria found on decaying animal carcasses. These bacteria are saprophytes because they obtain their nutrient from dead organic matters. Besides absorption through dead organic matters, there is through living organisms. For example, absorption through living organisms are the tuberculosis, TB, bacteria that obtain its food from the lung tissues of the patient. These bacteria are parasites because they obtain their nutrient from living organisms. So this absorption is divided into two: dead organisms and living organisms. Bacteria obtaining food from dead organisms are called as saprophytes, while bacteria living in living organisms are called parasites. So let's see, besides nutrient, what are the other characteristics? Reproduction. Characteristic of bacteria in terms of method of reproduction is divided into two methods: asexual and sexual reproduction. Some bacteria reproduce asexually. In an asexual method of reproduction, a new organism is formed and produced from a single parent. Binary fission is an example of asexual reproduction. It occurs when the environment is suitable. Binary fission is a simple cell division. First, the chromosome of the parent cell duplicates. Then, the parent cell divides into two identical daughter cells. The daughter cells are identical because they have the same copy of chromosomes. So here, we understand that reproduction is divided into two: asexual and sexual reproduction. Asexual happens, what the process is called as binary fission. But in binary fission, it happens because when this condition is correct and it only needs a single parent. But what is this another one called sexual reproduction? Let's look at the term it is called. Some bacteria reproduce sexually. In a sexual method of reproduction, two cells, one from each parent, are joined together to form one fertilized cell. There are a few types of sexual reproduction. Conjugation is an example of sexual reproduction. Conjugation is a method of sexual reproduction because a new individual is formed. It occurs in harsh conditions where there are lack of food and water. The new cell has a different DNA structure. Therefore, the recipient cell is a new cell because it has a different DNA structure. So here we have learned two types and methods of reproduction: binary fission and conjugation. Now you have to understand the difference. It all depends on the surrounding condition. When the surrounding condition is not suitable for bacteria, it automatically becomes conjugation. Binary fission happens when the condition is suitable. On top of that, binary fission happens when one individual actually becomes as a two, while in conjugation, it involves two different bacteria. Now let's move on to fungi. Characteristics of fungi. Let's start from appearance. Some fungi are unicellular and multicellular organisms. Yeast and molds are examples of different types of fungi. Yeast are unicellular microorganisms. They look round or oval shape under the microscope. When the yeast are in large cluster, they can be seen with the naked eye as a white powdery substance. Mold are multicellular microorganisms. They have long thread-like strands or filaments called hyphae. The hyphae give the mold their fuzzy appearance. Example: molds on the rotten bread. Molds can be found on some surfaces like damp walls, clothes, or rotting food. So in terms of appearances for fungi, here we can see two different types, that is yeast and mold. Yeast is a unicellular, while mold is a multicellular. So here we have learned the difference between yeast and mold. Now let's look at the habitat of fungi. Fungi can be found in a variety of habitats: fresh water, plants, walls, soil, seawater, and human body. Suitable condition for growth for fungi is dark and moist conditions are most suitable for the growth of fungi. So therefore, fungi grows in dark and moist conditions. So here it actually practically is everywhere. So therefore, what is the most suitable condition for it to grow? Dark and moist. Does it grow under the sun? No. Why is it? So we're going to learn later why it can't grow under the sun. Sun has one characteristic: ultraviolet rays that comes from the sun. So therefore, fungi rarely grows under the sun. Nutrition. Most fungi are saprophytes. This means that they obtain nutrient from dead organic matters such as decaying plants or animals. Fungi digest their food outside of their bodies. They excrete enzymes that break down substrates. The nutrients from the substrates are then absorbed through the cell walls. Fungi do not make their own food because they do not have chlorophyll. So fungi is a saprophyte. And as we have learned earlier, saprophyte actually comes from dead living organisms. So how does this fungi actually work? It actually excretes this enzyme outside, whereby it will be digested and it absorbs this digested food. This is how fungi does the absorption and obtains the nutrient. Why fungi cannot make its own food? Because it doesn't have chlorophyll. That's why, not having chlorophyll, it can't absorb or carry out photosynthesis or even absorb the sunlight. No point. So now we have learned on this nutrition part. Let's move on. There are many types of fungi. Hence, there are different methods of reproduction. Let's look at the two different ways of how some fungi reproduce. Budding is an example of asexual reproduction. This method of reproduction is similar to binary fission. How does budding occur? Budding involves a single cell dividing into two separate cells. The parent yeast cell grows a bud. As the bud grows, the nucleus of the parent cell divides into two. One nucleus enters the bud. The bud later breaks off from the parent cell. The new bud or daughter cell develops into a yeast cell. Now let's look at the spore formation. Most of the asexual reproduction of fungi is by spore formation. A spore is a reproductive cell that can grow directly into a new individual cell. The spore is formed are identical. The spores are dispersed by wind, water, and animals. The spores then germinate into new individual fungi cells. Some type of fungi, like the bread mold, produces spores through conjugation, a method of sexual reproduction. This takes place when the surrounding condition is not suitable. For example, when there is a lack of food or water. So here we have learned about two different types of reproduction, that is budding and spore formation. Now budding has its way of reproduction and spore formation has its way whereby there is spore on top. So there's a way of spreading. And let's move on to the next, that is protozoa. Now let's look at the characteristic of protozoa in terms of appearance. Protozoa are unicellular microorganisms. Their size ranges from 5 micrometers to 500 micrometers. There are different types of protozoa. The flagellata protozoa have long extension called the flagella. The flagella help the protozoa to move and feed in water. The ciliated protozoa are covered with short hair-like structures called cilia. The cilia help the protozoa to move and feed in water. The amoeba has a temporary projection of false feet called pseudopods. The pseudopods help it to move and feed in water too. In terms of appearance for protozoa, there are three different appearances. One, where protozoa has flagella, some of them have cilia, and on top of the example is an amoeba, and how amoeba moves is by its pseudopods. Now we have seen in terms of appearance. Let's see in terms of habitat. Protozoa exist in places where most other microorganisms can be found. Protozoa can be found in places such as the sea, river banks, human intestine, animals and aquatic plants. Like most microorganisms, protozoa are found in moist and dark conditions. They survive and grow in conditions where nutrients are easily available too. So here, the habitat of protozoa, they are actually practically everywhere. But how and where are they found? They are only found in dark condition, and on top of that, moist places. So we have seen the habitat of protozoa. Let's move on to the nutrition. How do they get their food? Do they have chlorophyll to make their own food? Let's find out. Protozoa hunt and gather food. Protozoa mainly feed on other things like bacteria, fungi, algae and other type of protozoa. Protozoa obtain their nutrients by carrying out saprophism, parasitism or as autotrophs. For example, amoeba gets nutrient from its surrounding. The amoeba surrounds and engulfs its food. Enzymes are secreted to digest the food. The amoeba then absorbs the nutrient from the digested food. So here, protozoa actually hunts. So that's why they require cilia, flagella and pseudopods to move. So here we have seen the example for amoeba, how amoeba actually engulfs the food. It actually engulfs, surrounds, secretes an digestive enzyme, breaks it down and absorbs the food. So here what we learn is protozoa doesn't have chlorophyll to produce its own food. So what are the terms involved in here? Protozoa actually are saprophism, parasitism or autotrophs. The amoeba reproduces by binary fission. Binary fission is a method of asexual reproduction. The nucleus of the parent cells divides into two by mitosis. The parent cells then divides into two identical daughter cells. Some type of protozoa reproduce differently. Paramecium, the ciliated protozoa, reproduces through conjugation. So here we can see the reproduction, one as a binary fission, another one is through conjugation. But amoeba is an example of binary fission, while paramecium is an example of conjugation. Now we have seen all the characteristics of protozoa. Now let's move on to algae. Now let's find out about the characteristics of algae, starting from appearances. Algae are simple plants which do not have real roots, stems and leaves. Algae vary greatly in size, 1 to 10,000 micrometer. They exist in shapes such as oval, round, filament or network. So here we have seen the appearance of algae. Characteristic in terms of habitat. Algae can be found in aquatic habitats and moist conditions on land. Phytoplanktons are usually found in the lake and sea. Algae can tolerate a wide range of temperature. They are found in places like hot spring, snow and deep polar ice. Here we have to highlight that the algae actually lives in aquatic habitats and moist conditions. And they can be found in places like hot spring, snow and deep polar ice. They can go in an extreme condition. Nutrients. Algae get nutrients to grow through photosynthesis. The chlorophyll in algae absorbs sunlight to produce nutrients. So algae no need to depend on other organisms, they can do their own food. because through photosynthesis process. Why? Because they have chlorophyll in them. So that's why you can actually see them on the surface of a water and they look green. Reproduction. Some algae reproduce asexually by binary fission. Examples are Chlamydomonas. Some algae reproduce sexually by conjugation. Examples are Spirogyra. So the reproduction of algae in here has two, binary fission and conjugation, and they have different examples for each. Like binary fission is like Chlamydomonas, while Spirogyra goes through conjugation. Characteristics of viruses. Viruses are the smallest microorganisms. They can pass through a fine porcelain filter and only be seen using an electron microscope. The size of viruses vary from 0.02 to 0.4 micrometer. Viruses exist in a shape such as rods, spheres, cuboid, and vibrios. Viruses are different from bacteria because they do not have nucleus, cytoplasm, cell membrane, and cell organelles. Viruses do not carry out living things such as respiration, nutrition, excretion, and reproduction, unless inside the cell. All viruses behave like a parasite, living inside the cell and form a crystal when found outside a cell. So these are the characteristics, quite a lot, but practically what I can say is viruses actually is not similar to any bacteria. They are a bit different and it's one of the smallest microorganisms. Now let's look in terms of habitat. Viruses are found almost everywhere. Viruses are inert on their own. They spring into action when they come into contact with a suitable plant, animal, or living cells. Now let's look at the nutrient that is required by virus. Do they need to eat? Viruses do not eat, respire, and excrete. They exist for only one purpose, that is to reproduce. So that means it looks like they are robots. They are there just to reproduce. They do not eat, they do not go through certain things. So let's see in terms of reproduction, how are they reproduced? Viruses are parasites and can infect plants, animals, human beings, and even some bacteria. Viruses reproduce only when they come into contact with a living cell. A virus lands on a suitable host. It attaches itself firmly onto the cell. The virus then injects DNA or RNA into the host cell. The DNA or RNA is next replicated using the host cell. The new virus then are released from the host cell. The released viruses then attach themselves to another host cell and the viral reproduction continues. So it's a matter of introducing this RNA or DNA into the host cell, reproducing, duplication, multiplying, and therefore comes out and bursts out and attacks another cell. So it's a continuous cycle in here. And as you can see, it's a totally different reproduction. It is not binary fusion, it is not conjugation or budding or spore formation. It's totally different. So virus, it's a bit different characteristics. Now let's look at some of the questions. P, Q, R, and S are examples of bacteria and algae. Which of the following is correct? A, bacteria is P and R, while algae is Q and S. B, bacteria Q and S, while algae P and R. C, bacteria Q and R and algae P and S. D, bacteria P and S and algae Q and R. Now we have learned in bacteria there are certain shapes, spiral, coccus, vibrio and all. So in here there are two characteristics that looks like a bacteria. P and R in here actually looks like a bacteria, while Q and S is a type of algae. Now Q has a flagella, S looks like a long thread spirilla or something like that. So therefore Q and S is an algae and P and R is a bacteria. The answer is A. Question 2. Figure shows a type of reproduction. Which of the following is the type of reproduction shown? A. Budding, B. Conjugation, C. Binary fission, D. Formation of spores. Now we can also say it's a form of budding, because budding happens whereby a new cell actually is reproduced. But you have to understand, budding happens, the part that new cell is generated is small compared to the parent cell. So in here we can see both sizes are same. So therefore the answer is binary fission. The answer is C. Question 3. A microorganism is an organism that A. Can spoil food, B. Consists of only one cell, C. Can be seen with the naked eye, D. Can only be seen under a microscope. So in here the answer is very obvious, because A, B and C doesn't actually shows the characteristic of a microorganism. So therefore the answer here is actually D. Now let's summarize what we have learned today. Let's look at how these microorganisms appear. Appearances for bacteria. The bacilli, cocci, spirilla and vibrio bacteria are examples of bacteria with different shapes and sizes. Fungi. Yeast and molds are two different types of fungi. Algae. The phytoplankton is a microscopic algae. Protozoa. Protozoa have a variety of shapes and sizes too. Viruses. Viruses are the smallest of these classes of microorganisms. We have seen on terms of appearances. Let's look at in terms of habitat. Bacteria and viruses can be found almost everywhere on Earth, and even in extreme conditions. Fungi and protozoa can be found in moist and dark conditions. Algae can be found in aquatic habitat and moist condition on land. However, they can also be found in extreme condition. Let's summarize about the nutrient that is required by the microorganisms, all the 5 types of them. Some bacteria make their own food through photosynthesis. Some bacteria are saprophytes, absorbing nutrients from dead organic matters. Others are parasites, absorbing nutrients from living host. Fungi. Most fungi are saprophytes. Algae are photosynthetic, making their own food with the help of sunlight. Protozoa feed on certain living things. Viruses do not eat, respire, and excrete. So, here we have summarized about the nutrition and finally about the reproduction. Method of reproduction. Binary fission and conjugation are methods of reproduction of some bacteria, protozoa and algae. Budding and spore formation are method of reproduction of most fungi. Viruses replicate inside living hosts. So here we have learned about the different types and classifications of microorganisms. I hope you have enjoyed the lesson today. Thank you for watching iTTV. I'll see you in the next lesson. Goodbye, students.